daughter-in-law moved into my home on a Tuesday in November, and by the following spring, I no longer recognized the house I had lived in for 31 years. But the morning she sat down at my kitchen table and slid a piece of paper across to me, smiling that smile of hers, the one that never reached her eyes, she had no idea who else was about to walk through my front door. My name is Constance. I'm 67 years old. I live in a red brick semi-detached on Maple Ridge Crescent in Guelph, Ontario, the same house where I raised my son, where my husband Jeffrey planted the lilac bush by the front walk the year before he passed. I'm a retired school librarian. I grow tomatoes every summer in the backyard. I make my own bread on Sundays, and until 18 months ago, I considered myself a woman who understood people fairly well. I was wrong about one person, and that one person nearly cost me everything. My son's name is Philip. He's 43. He was a quiet, thoughtful boy who grew into a quiet, thoughtful man. Or so I believed. He works in project management for a construction firm here in Guelph. He met his wife, Tamsin, at a conference in Toronto about 5 years ago. She's 38, sharp-dressed, works in financial consulting, and from the very first dinner we had together at the Woolly Pub on Wyndham Street, there was something I couldn't quite name, a precision about her. The way she filed every piece of information away behind those pale eyes. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself any mother has a hard time welcoming another woman into her son's life. I made myself be generous. They married 2 years later at a small ceremony at Elora Gorge. It was beautiful. I wore my blue dress and I danced with Philip, and I cried the good kind of tears. Jeffrey would have loved to see it. The trouble started the way it always does, quietly, with perfectly reasonable explanations. Philip's firm lost a major contract. It was the kind of setback that happens in that industry, the kind Jeffrey himself had weathered twice in his career at the mill. But Philip hadn't inherited Jeffrey's steadiness under pressure. He got quiet in a way that worried me. Not peaceful quiet, pressurized quiet, the kind of quiet that builds. Tamsin's consulting work had been slow that year too. They'd overextended on a condo they were renting in the west end of the city, a beautiful place, too expensive for what things had become. So when Philip called me in October and asked, carefully, in that voice he used when he needed something and didn't know how to ask, whether they might stay with me just for a few months while things stabilized, I said yes without hesitation. Of course I did. He's my son. This was his home first. They arrived on a Tuesday with a moving truck and 17 boxes and Tamsin's cat, a large grey thing named Brisket, who immediately claimed Jeffrey's armchair in the sitting room. I chose not to say anything about that. The first month was fine. Better than fine, even. Philip helped me fix the eaves trough I'd been putting off. Tamsin made a Thai curry one night that was genuinely wonderful. We watched the news together after supper. It felt, in those early weeks, like something that might even be good for all of us. But I'm 67, not naive. I notice things. The way Tamsin would come into the kitchen while I was cooking and suggest, always phrased as a helpful suggestion, that perhaps I should keep certain ingredients in different cupboards, or that the pantry would work better reorganized her way, the way she stopped asking whether I minded, before she rearranged, and simply rearranged, the way my Sunday bread baking, which I had done in that kitchen for over 3 decades, began to feel like an inconvenience I was apologizing for. Small things, the kind of things you talk yourself out of noticing. I have a dear friend named Rosemary. We've known each other since we were both young mothers pushing strollers along the Speed River Trail. She lives 4 houses down and she's never been what you'd call subtle. About 3 months into the arrangement, she knocked on my door on a Saturday morning, looked me directly in the eye and said, "Connie, you look like a woman who isn't sleeping in her own house." She wasn't wrong. I'd started avoiding my own kitchen in the mornings because Tamsin was always there first, occupying it with her laptop and her phone calls and an air of business that made me feel I was interrupting something important simply by wanting to make my tea. I'd started eating lunch quickly, alone, in my room, with the door closed. I'd started apologizing for the noise of the television, for running the dryer in the evening, for the smell of the lilac coming through the window, for existing, essentially, in the house I owned outright and had owned for 31 years. And Philip saw none of it, or chose not to. He was working long hours again, the firm having won a new contract that required him to drive to Cambridge most days. He came home tired, and Tamsin was always there, attentive, managing him, telling him about her day, and the version of our domestic arrangement that reached his ears had been carefully filtered. I tried once. Just once. I sat down with him on a Sunday afternoon in March while Tamsin was out getting her hair done, and I said gently that I was feeling a little lost in my own home, that I wondered if we might all talk about some boundaries, some shared space. He looked at me with that expression, patient, faintly exasperated, the one he'd used as a teenager when he thought I was overreacting. "Mom," he said, "Tamsin's going through a lot too. She's not trying to make you uncomfortable. Maybe just give it more time." I gave it more time. In May, the money started. It wasn't a theft, not technically. It began with Tamsin sitting down with me and presenting. That's the early word for it, presenting. A spreadsheet she'd built on her laptop, showing the household expenses, what they were contributing, what I was contributing, and a series of suggested adjustments to how we handled the shared costs. She had calculated, she said, that given the square footage they were occupying and the utilities they were using, their fair share came to a number that was, conveniently, almost exactly what they were already giving me each month for grocery contribution. So in fact, she explained with a small pleasant smile, they were already being more than fair. What the spreadsheet did not include was the cost of my hydro bill, which had increased significantly since November, or the additional wear on the appliances, or the fact that I was now buying groceries for 3 people on a pension and a small RRSP withdrawal each month, and had been quietly making up the difference myself without a word. I am not a foolish woman. I understood what the spreadsheet was. It was a document designed to look like fairness while extracting it. I said I'd look it over. She nodded and closed the laptop with a click that felt, I don't know how else to put it, final. That evening, after they'd both gone to bed, I sat in the kitchen alone. The house was quiet. Outside, the lilac bush Geoffrey had planted was in full bloom, and the smell of it drifted through the screen door. I had my tea. I had my thoughts. I thought about the night, 15 years ago, when Geoffrey was in the hospital, and I kept vigil at this same table, making calls, keeping my hands busy with whatever I could find, waiting for news. I had survived that. I had survived raising a child alone for 12 years after he passed, managing the finances, managing the house, managing everything without complaint and without depending on anyone. I was not a woman who fell apart. But I was a woman, I realized that evening, who had allowed someone to make her feel very small, very slowly, over a very long time. And I had let it happen because she was married to my son, and I had confused love with acceptance of anything done in love's name. I looked at my hands around the mug. Geoffrey's wedding ring, which I wear on my right hand now, caught the kitchen light. Not anymore, I thought. I didn't sleep much that night, but I wasn't idle. I thought carefully. I am a librarian by training, which means I know how to research, how to organize, and how to build a case. What I needed wasn't rage. Rage was Tamsin's territory. What I needed was documentation, and allies, and a plan that left no room for misinterpretation. The first call I made, at 7:30 the following morning, while Tamsin was in the shower and Philip had already left for Cambridge, was to a woman named Adaeze. She and I had served together on the library board for years. She's now a paralegal at a firm that handles estate and tenancy law right here in Guelph. We've had many cups of tea over many years, and she knows me, knows my character, knows what I am and am not capable of. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Connie, the house is in your name only." "Yes," I said. "Always has been. And there's been no formal tenancy agreement signed." None. Good, that's important. She paused again. Under Ontario's Residential Tenancies Act, family members living with an owner in the owner's principal residence are generally not protected under the Act in the same way that formal tenants are. That said, you need to do this correctly and without confrontation if you want it clean. She told me what I needed to do. A formal written notice. A reasonable timeline, 60 days, she said, was generous but defensible. Documentation of the financial arrangement and any incidents. A witness, if possible, for the delivery. And then she said something else. Do you want to just make them leave, Connie? Or do you want them to understand why? I thought about that question for a long time. I want them to understand, I said finally. Good, she said. Then let me make a call of my own. The second call I made that morning was to Rosemary. I asked if she would come for coffee that Saturday at 10 o'clock. I told her there would be someone else there as well, and I needed a witness I trusted. She didn't ask for explanations. That's a 40-year friendship for you. I'll be there, she said. Should I bring the shortbread? Bring the shortbread, I said. We might need it. The week that followed was the strangest of my life. I went about everything normally. I made meals. I did laundry. I answered Tamsin's questions about the Wi-Fi and the recycling schedule. I helped Philip find his rain jacket. I was pleasant. I was the mother and the landlord that I'd always been, and underneath all of it, I was building something. I kept a written log. Every morning, I dated a page in a small notebook I kept in my bedside drawer, the kind of plain Hilroy notebook I used to buy by the dozen for the school. I noted the household costs I was absorbing alone. I noted the incidents, the time Tamsin moved Jeffrey's photograph, the one I keep on the shelf in the sitting room, him and me at Peggy's Cove, the summer before he got sick, and put a plant in its place without asking, the time she told Philip while I was in the next room and could hear perfectly clearly, that your mother's set in her ways and it's making this harder than it needs to be. The time she poured out a container of the chicken stock I'd been developing for a soup and replaced it in the fridge with one of her meal prep containers because the fridge is getting disorganized. I wrote it all down in the neat, careful print I developed over 30 years of writing signs for the library. On the Friday evening before that Saturday, Tamsin came to me while I was in the garden. She had printed a fresh copy of the spreadsheet, updated. She sat down across from me at the patio table with a pleasant expression and said she'd been thinking about the long-term financial arrangement and that she and Philip had discussed it, and they felt that given how long they'd been contributing to the household, it might be time to formalize things. Perhaps, she suggested, they could be formally added to the household as co-occupants with a documented cost-sharing agreement. It would help them, she said, with their credit profile. She slid the paper across the garden table. I looked at it. Then I looked at her. I said I would look it over. She nodded and smiled and went back inside. That night I could not sleep, but this time it wasn't from distress. It was from a cold, clarifying certainty that what was going to happen the next morning needed to happen, and I was ready. I was up at 5:30. The light in Guelph in late May comes early and soft, and the kitchen was full of it when I came downstairs. I put the kettle on. I stood at the window and looked at the lilac bush, which was still going, still gorgeous, filling the yard with that smell I have loved for 31 years. Geoffrey, I thought, you would not recognize what has been done to this house, but you would know what to do about it. You always did. I baked. I had bought a good shortbread tin from the bulk barn the week before, and I made 2 batches, one with lemon zest, the way Rosemary likes it, and one plain. I made a proper pot of tea. I set the dining room table with the blue and white service I keep for company, the one my mother left me. I pressed a linen cloth. I put a small vase of lilac clippings from the garden in the centre. Philip and Tamsin were still asleep. I had timed everything carefully. At 9:55, the doorbell rang. I went to the door. Rosemary was on the front step, holding a tin of her own shortbread and wearing the expression she reserves for situations that require her to be simultaneously warm and utterly immovable. Beside her stood our Daisy, in a charcoal blazer, carrying a leather folder. Behind them, a young woman I hadn't met, a Daisy's colleague, she'd told me, who would act as a second witness. I looked at Rosemary. She looked at my face, at the shadows under my eyes, at the set of my jaw. "Ready," she said. "Ready," I said. They came in. I set them at the dining table. I poured the tea. I put the shortbread out. And then we waited. I heard Tamsin first, the particular sound of her moving around upstairs, the cabinet in the bathroom, the closet door. Then Philip, slower, groggy, the heavy step on the stairs that was exactly the same as it was when he was 15 years old, and I was calling him down for breakfast. He appeared in the dining room doorway first, in a t-shirt and track pants, hair not yet combed. He saw the table, the visitors, the tea service, and frowned in the harmless confusion of someone who doesn't yet understand what they've walked into. Then Tamsin appeared behind him. She was dressed already. She was always dressed early. She saw the table, and her eyes moved, quickly and precisely, from Rosemary to Adaise to the young woman with the folder, and then to me. And in that flicker, that one instant before her expression settled back into pleasantness, I saw something I'd never seen on her face before. Uncertainty. Philip said, "Mom, what's going on?" I said, "Please sit down, sweetheart. Both of you. There's tea." Tamsin didn't move for a moment. She was still doing that assessment behind her eyes. Philip sat down. After a pause, Tamsin sat across from him, to my left. She folded her hands on the table. Her nails were perfect, as always. Rosemary poured the tea with a steady, unhurried hand. Adaise set her leather folder on the table, but did not open it yet. I sat at the head of the table. I smoothed the linen cloth with my palms. I looked at my son, who was looking at me with a growing wariness that I recognized. It was the look of a man who has two women in his life pulling in opposite directions and is beginning to understand that he's been choosing the wrong one. "I want to tell you something," I said. My voice was steady. It surprised me. Tamsin said pleasantly, "Of course, Constance, is everything all right?" "No," I said, "it isn't, but it's going to be." I looked at Philip. "When your father and I bought this house," I said, "we had $47 left in our account after the down payment. We drove home from signing the papers, and I cried in the car, not from sadness, but from relief, because it was ours. We had worked for it, genuinely worked, and it was solid and real, and it belonged to us and to you, in the sense that you were the reason we wanted it. Philip, you learned to walk in this hallway. You had your appendix scare in the kitchen, remember? 4 years old, terrified, and your father sat on that floor with you and sang hockey songs until the ambulance came." Philip's face was doing something complicated. "This house," I continued, "is the last thing your father and I built together. I have maintained it alone for 12 years. I have kept the furnace serviced and the roof reshingled and the garden going and the taxes paid, without any help, because it is my home and I am capable of caring for it. When you asked to move in, I said yes immediately, because you are my son, and this is your home too, in your heart, the way a childhood home always is. But I was wrong to assume that the people I invited in would feel the same way about what that means." I looked at Tamsin then. She held my gaze. Credit to her for that. Adaise opened her folder. "This," I said, "is a notice to vacate under the Ontario Residential Tenancies Act, and given the nature of your occupancy here as family members residing in the owner-occupied principal residence, Adaise has prepared a formal notice giving you 60 days. Today is the 24th of May. That makes your deadline the 23rd of July, which is generous and deliberate. You'll have the whole summer." Tamsin's pleasant expression had not moved, but her hands had tightened slightly on the table. Philip said, "Mom, let me finish, sweetheart. I have been trying to finish this sentence for about 8 months. Please." He closed his mouth. "I have here," I said, setting my Hilroy notebook on the table beside the notice, "a record of the additional household costs I have absorbed since November, which amount to approximately $1,800 over and above what you've contributed. I'm not asking to be repaid. I want you to see it because I want you to understand that I have never been confused about what was happening in this house. I simply wasn't ready to act on it yet. Rosemary refilled everyone's tea with a perfectly timed, perfectly peaceful movement. What changed? Tamsin asked. Her voice was controlled. I looked at her directly. You handed me a document, I said, and asked me to sign my name to an arrangement that would have given you legal standing in this property. You did it at the garden table while I was tending my husband's garden, and you smiled when you did it. Silence. I think you believed, I continued, that I was the kind of woman who could be managed, the quiet, retired librarian. A little sentimental, easy to redirect. I understand why you thought that. I made it easy to think that for too long. Tamsin opened her mouth, then she closed it. Philip was looking at the table. I said more gently, I love you, Philip. That does not change. But I have learned, late perhaps, but I have learned that loving someone does not mean shrinking yourself to make room for them. Your father and I didn't build this house so I could be made to feel like a visitor in it. Adayas slid the notice across the table. This is not a punishment, she said quietly and professionally. It is a legal document. Constance has the right to occupy her home. You have the right to 60 days and a clear departure timeline. I'd encourage you to find counsel of your own if you have questions, but the documentation is clear. Tamsin looked at the paper, a long look. Then she looked at Philip, and something passed between them that I couldn't entirely read, except that it felt for the first time in 8 months like an honest look. Philip picked up the notice. He read it. He set it down. He looked at me. Mum, he said. His voice was low. Why didn't you tell me it had gotten this bad? I wanted to say I tried. I sat with you in March and I tried. I said instead, I'm telling you now. He nodded. A slow nod. He looked exhausted in a different way than usual, not the exhaustion of a busy work week, the exhaustion of a man who has been looking in one direction for a very long time and has just turned around. Tamsin didn't say anything for a long while. She was looking at the vase of lilac in the center of the table. Then she said, very quietly, I didn't realize I was doing that. A pause. Or maybe I didn't let myself realize it. I don't know if she meant it. I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that it was the first completely unguarded thing she'd said in 8 months. The meeting ended without drama. That was what I'd planned for, and that was what we had. Adayas answered Philip's questions about the timeline. Rosemary offered shortbread, and the offer was accepted by everyone, which seems like a small thing, but felt important. Before they went back upstairs, Philip stopped in the doorway and looked at me. I'm sorry, Mom, he said. Not, I'm sorry I didn't see it. Not, I'm sorry she did this. Just, I'm sorry. A clean and simple sorry, the kind that doesn't make excuses, the kind that means something. I nodded. It's a start, I said. The 60 days ran their course. They found a 2-bedroom apartment in Kitchener, East Side, more affordable than the West End condo they'd had before. The move out was orderly. Tamsin, to her credit, cleaned the bathroom and left the kitchen as she'd found it. Actually, as she'd found it, which is to say reorganized from how it had been. But I rearranged it back in an afternoon, and it took me less time than I expected. Brisket, the cat, knocked over Jeffrey's photograph getting down from the windowsill on their last morning. The frame cracked. Philip taped it together before he left. I still have it on the shelf in the sitting room. The tape shows if you look closely. I've thought about replacing the frame. I haven't, yet. There's something about a repaired thing that I find I'm not willing to put away. The house was quiet again that first evening. I made soup from the chicken stock I'd been developing for months, the good version, uninterrupted, in my kitchen, at my own pace. I ate at the kitchen table with the radio on, a program about gardening from CBC, and I looked at the backyard with the screen door and at the lilac bush, which had finished its bloom for the year and was settling back into its plain, reliable green. Rosemary came by 2 days later with a bottle of Ontario ice wine and sat with me on the back porch while the sun went down. We didn't talk about it much. We didn't need to. She refilled my glass when it was low, and we sat there in the quiet and watched the fireflies come up from the grass the way they always do in Guelph in late summer. Philip and I have coffee every second Sunday now. Not here, not yet, at a small place on Gordon Street, a booth by the window, the kind where the coffee comes in an honest mug and they bring you cream in a little steel pitcher. He's quieter than he used to be, but a different kind of quiet. Not pressurized, more considered. He and Tamsin are working through things, he says, and I take that at face value because it's not mine to carry anymore. The therapist Adize recommended, a woman who works with seniors navigating family dynamics at a practice on Woolwich Street. I went to see her on a Thursday in August. I wasn't sure what to expect. I'm of a generation that solve things by getting on with them, and the idea of paying someone to listen to me felt vaguely indulgent. But she was warm and plain-spoken, and not at all what I'd imagined. She asked me to tell her about the house, and for an hour I talked about Jeffrey, and the $47, and the eaves trough, and the bread I make on Sundays, and the lilac bush by the walk. It was the first time I understood that what Tamsin had taken from me, or tried to take, wasn't primarily the space, or the money, or the authority. It was the sense that the house still knew who I was, that the rooms still held me. They do, I think. They do still. I bake bread every Sunday. I tend the garden. I have rosemary for tea on Thursdays, and sometimes Adize joins us, and we sit in the kitchen that is my kitchen again, and we talk about nothing important and everything important the way women of a certain age do, the way I hope I will be doing for a long time yet. I am 67 years old. I am a widow and a librarian and a gardener and a mother, and the owner of a red brick semi-detached on Maple Ridge Crescent in Guelph, Ontario, where the lilac is already beginning to bud again for next year. And if you are listening to this and you recognize something of yourself in it, the quietly shrinking, the apologizing for your own kitchen, the talking yourself out of what you know, I want to tell you, the document can be prepared, the notice can be given, the table can be set. You don't need to raise your voice. You just need to know whose house it is. I still think about that garden table, the way she set the spreadsheet down in front of me with both hands, like she was doing me a favor. The lilac was blooming behind her, and I remember thinking, Jeffrey planted that bush the year before he got sick, and she has no idea what this garden means. And she never asked. That's the thing about people who take. They don't ask. They calculate. I spent a long time being angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. But sitting with my therapist on Woolwich Street one Thursday afternoon, I said something out loud that I haven't quite put into words before. I did see it. I saw it from the first month. I simply hadn't yet decided what kind of woman I was going to be about it. That's where everything turned, I think. Not the morning Adize and Rosemarie came through my front door. Not the moment Tamsin's face went uncertain for the first time. It turned the night I sat alone in my kitchen with my tea and Jeffrey's ring on my right hand and made a choice, not about them, but about me. About whether I was willing to know what I already knew and act on it anyway. That takes something. I don't have a tidy name for it. It's not just courage, though it's that. It's more like a refusal to let your own kindness be used against you. I am a generous woman. I was raised to be. My mother believed that a home should be open, that you make room, that you don't put conditions on love. And she was right, but she also locked her own front door every night. She also knew whose name was on the deed. What I had confused for too many months was generosity with surrender. I thought being a good mother meant absorbing whatever came. I thought maintaining peace meant maintaining silence. And Tamsin understood that about me, not consciously, maybe, but functionally. She understood that I would talk myself out of my own discomfort before I would cause anyone else the inconvenience of being held accountable. What changed was not my heart. It was my clarity. I went to Adize because I had thought it through, calmly and carefully, the way I used to help students find what they needed in the library, not by rushing, but by knowing exactly what you're looking for and where it lives. I documented everything because I understood that feelings, however legitimate, don't move situations. Facts do. And I set the table and pressed the linen and put the lilac in the vase because I wanted everyone in that room, including myself, to understand that this was not a breakdown. This was a woman who knew her own house. Philip said he was sorry. One clean word. I'm not sure he fully understands yet what he was apologizing for. The overlooking, the choosing ease over truth, the way he let someone diminish his mother in increments small enough to ignore. But he said it without qualification, and that means he's thinking. Thinking is where it starts. As for Tamsin, I don't know. I genuinely don't. That one unguarded moment at the table when she said she hadn't let herself realize what she was doing, I've turned it over many times. It might have been true. People can do real harm without ever naming it to themselves. That doesn't excuse it, but it does make it human. And I am 67 years old, and I have seen enough of life to know that human is complicated enough without making it simpler than it is. What I know for certain is this: the house is mine again. The bread rises on Sunday mornings without apology. The radio plays in the kitchen, and no one makes me feel it is an imposition. Rosemary comes on Thursdays. The lilac will bloom again in May. And if you are somewhere in the middle of what I was in, the slow shrinking, the self-talk, the waiting for something to change on its own, I want you to know that the table can be set differently. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to burn anything down. You just have to decide, quietly and clearly, whose house it actually is.